My boyfriend chose his sister over me just because she was poor, until I found out she'd been lying about everything. Bad weather likes to crash my big life moments. The day I met my boyfriend, the sky was threatening to flood the whole town, and the wind kept pushing people sideways every time they stepped out of a car. Someone thought it was a good idea to still go ahead with this community fundraiser in a rental hall near the edge of town. So there I was in a thrift store dress, holding a plastic cup of flat soda, pretending I was not freezing every time the door opened and another gust of air came in with the next batch of people. My name is Karen, by the way. And back then, I was the queen of pretending everything was fine, even when my life felt like one long juggling act. I worked as an office assistant at a small clinic. I rented a tiny apartment that smelled like someone else's cooking no matter what I did. And I was definitely not the kind of person who thought true love would show up at a folding table covered with a wrinkled tablecloth and badly arranged cupcakes. But there he was, stacking chairs with a volunteer badge hanging crooked on his chest, laughing at something one of the kids said while he tried not to drop a whole row of folding chairs at once. He walked over when he saw me standing alone near the snack table. He asked if I wanted help opening one of the stubborn drink bottles, and I joked that if the bottle did not want to be opened, maybe it knew something I did not. He laughed like I was actually funny and not just nervous. We ended up talking for hours while the storm howled outside. People came and went, and the organizers debated out loud if they should end the event early before someone's car got taken by a ditch. I remember thinking that it felt weirdly easy to talk to him, like I had already known him for years and just forgot. He told me he worked long shifts at a warehouse, sometimes overnight, sometimes early morning, whatever they needed, because he had a mortgage and he wanted to pay it down as fast as possible. He said that house was his biggest accomplishment, the thing he was most proud of, and he said it the way some people talk about finally getting a degree or opening a business. There was this light in his eyes when he talked about the house, like it was not just drywall and paint, but proof that he had pulled himself out of some dark place. I found out what that dark place was later that night when I finally met his sister. He did not bring her up right away. We had already added each other on a social media app, already swapped numbers, already promised we would see each other again when the weather stopped trying to kill everyone, and then he mentioned her almost as an afterthought. He said he did not live alone, that his sister stayed with him, that she had been through a lot, and that the situation was complicated. He said complicated the way people say it when they hope you will not ask follow-up questions. I did not push. I had my own complicated people. I knew what it was like to have that one relative whose name made you tense up a little, because you never knew what state they would be in when you walked through the door. I just nodded and told him I understood, and I meant it. I genuinely thought I could handle it. I did not realize yet that the house he loved so much was basically a stage where his entire family had been performing the same unhealthy play for years, and I was about to walk in as the new character no one wanted to rewrite the script for. We started dating a few days later. The storm passed, the roads cleared, and our messages turned into phone calls, and then into late-night drives where he would pick me up after work, still in his uniform, eyes tired but bright when he looked at me. He told me stories about working double shifts to save for the down payment on the house, about sleeping in his car between shifts while his friends went out partying. I told him about my boring little apartment and my even more boring job, about how I had always felt like I was waiting for my real life to start. The first time he invited me over to see the house, he looked almost shy when he handed me the spare key he had made just for me. He said it like that mattered, like a spare key meant something bigger than just metal and teeth and a place to hang it. I remember standing on the front porch, looking at the kind of house I used to drive past and assume did not belong to people like me. It was not a mansion, nothing like that, just a 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood with trees lining the street and kids riding bikes in circles in the cul-de-sac. But to him, it was everything. And standing there, listening to him talk about how long it had taken to fix the fence and how proud he was of the new roof, I started to feel protective of it too, even though my name was nowhere near the paperwork. The sister came to the door before I even stepped inside. She opened it halfway, looked at me up and down in one slow scan that made me suddenly very aware of my cheap shoes and the way my hair had frizzed from the humidity. She had that kind of posture that says, without a word, that she believes this is her territory. She did not smile. She did not introduce herself. She just looked at her brother, then at the hand he had at the small of my back, and said in this flat voice that dinner was already in the oven and could they please not make a mess in the kitchen. He told her my name and said I was the person he had been talking about. She nodded, still not smiling, and stepped aside just enough for us to pass. I have never in my life felt so much hostility in a hallway. It was like walking through invisible spider webs. I tried to brush it off. People have bad days. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was anxious. Maybe the story he had not told me yet was heavier than I realized. We sat in the living room and I tried to look at the house through his eyes. The furniture was simple but clean. The walls were painted a neutral color that probably came with whatever contractor special they picked, and there were framed photos on every surface. In almost all of them, it was him and her. Different ages, different haircuts, sometimes a third person, sometimes not, but always them. There were no pictures of anyone else. No parents on the mantle, no cousins, no old girlfriends. Just him and his sister locked in time over and over again. She sat in the armchair across from us and started asking questions in this weirdly polite but sharp tone. Where did I work? How much did I make? Did I live alone? How long had I lived in the city? Did I have debt? She did not even pretend to be subtle about it. It felt like a job interview where the job was gaining access to her brother's life, and I could see him shifting uncomfortably beside me, but he did not stop her. He answered for me a few times, trying to steer the conversation somewhere lighter, but she kept circling back to money, to stability, to what my long-term plans were. When I said I eventually wanted to move out of my apartment and maybe buy something smaller for myself, she gave this little smirk and said that buying property was not for everyone. She said it like I had claimed I wanted to colonize another planet. I laughed it off because I did not want to start a fight in a living room I had just set foot in. I did not know yet that the living room, the questions, the photos, all of it, were part of a structure she had built to keep him orbiting around her forever. Later that night, when he drove me home, he apologized for her. He said she had been through a lot, that her husband had left her out of nowhere, that the divorce had been brutal, and that after it all blew up, she had tried to end her life. He said she moved in with him 5 years ago after that, and she had never really left. He said he had promised their parents he would keep her safe. He said he knew she could be intense, but she was fragile, and he needed me to be patient. I remember staring out the car window, watching the streetlights blur by, and feeling this knot forming in my stomach. On one hand, I understood. Trauma is not neat. People do not heal on a schedule. On the other hand, 5 years. 5 years of living in his house, paying nothing, controlling the space. 5 years of every picture being just the two of them. 5 years of being the fragile one who everyone tiptoed around. I told him I could try. I told him I liked him enough to at least try. I told myself I could be the bigger person, the understanding girlfriend who did not get jealous of a sister who had clearly been through hell. I did not realize yet that trying to be the bigger person in a house where everyone else refuses to grow up just means you become the tallest target in the room. The months that followed were this weird mix of sweetness and tension. When it was just me and him, everything felt easy. We cooked, we watched dumb shows, we took late-night drives to get ice cream from whatever place was still open. We talked about everything and nothing. But whenever she was home, the whole house shifted. She claimed the living room every single night, sprawled out on the couch with a blanket, and the television volume set just loud enough that you could not really ignore it. If we tried to sit out there, she would sigh dramatically, or pause what she was watching and wait until we left, or start some conversation about her day that was clearly meant to drown out whatever we were talking about. I tried at first to make conversation with her. I offered to cook together. I asked about her job. I asked how she was feeling now compared to when everything fell apart. Sometimes she would engage for a few minutes, but it always turned into some backhanded comment. She would say I was lucky to still believe relationships could work out. She would ask if I was ready to support her brother when he burned out from working so many shifts. She would joke about how people always show their best version at the beginning and then start rotting from the inside once they feel safe. I started venting to the neighbor without even meaning to. She lived next door in a little house with flowers on the porch and a wind chime that never stopped tinkling. She introduced herself one afternoon when I was leaving, and she was coming home with grocery bags. And it just became this thing where we would wave, say a few words, and then one day I just spilled. I told her about the living room, about the questions, about the sister who treated me like a threat to be neutralized instead of a person. The neighbor sighed in that deep, knowing way that older women sigh, and told me gently that the situation had been tense long before I showed up. She said she had watched the sister strut around like she owned the place for years, while the brother ran himself into the ground, trying to make everyone happy. I did not like hearing that. I did not like feeling like I was walking into a mess that existed before me and might exist long after me. But I also liked him. I liked how he looked at me like he genuinely saw me. I liked how he remembered tiny details about my day that I had already forgotten. I liked how, when it was just us, I did not feel like I was auditioning for a part. So I stayed. I tried to make it work. The night I first stayed over, really stayed, like toothbrush in the bathroom, pajamas folded on his dresser, the sister watched me like a hawk. She did not even pretend to be discreet about it. Every time I crossed the hallway, she looked up. Every time I went into the kitchen, she appeared 5 seconds later, acting like she needed a glass of water or a snack or to wipe a counter that was already clean. She waited until he went to take a shower before bed to corner me in the hallway. She leaned against the wall like it was her throne and I was trespassing in her kingdom. She asked if I had given any thought to how my schedule would fit around their routine. I blinked because I honestly did not know what she meant. She explained, slowly, like I was not very bright, that she always watched her shows at a certain time, that she liked the kitchen a certain way, that she needed the bathroom free at certain hours in the morning because of her sensitive stomach. She asked what I planned to contribute to the house, financially, cleaning-wise, emotionally, as if those were all equal categories. I said I did not know yet, that we had not talked about moving in, that I was just staying the night. She gave me that little smirk again and said that women did not leave toothbrushes in bathrooms unless they had a plan. I wanted to tell her that her brother had asked me, that he was the one pushing for more time together, that I was just trying to keep up. Instead, I said nothing, because the shower turned off and I did not want him stepping into a full-blown fight the second he opened the door. Later, when we were in his room with the door closed, he seemed so happy to have me there that I did not bring it up. I told myself I would talk to him another time, a better time. That better time kept getting pushed back, because something always seemed to be burning in that house, even when there was no smoke. Months passed. We fell into a rhythm that did not really feel like mine, but I tried to fit into it anyway. I got used to keeping my voice down after a certain hour because she claimed to be a light sleeper. I got used to working around her moods when I needed to use the washing machine. I got used to sitting on the edge of his bed instead of on the couch if she was already sprawled there, even when she was clearly just doom scrolling on her phone with the television on as background noise. The first big sabotage came on a night that was supposed to be romantic. He had actually planned something. He asked his parents to take his sister out for dinner, told them he wanted some alone time at the house for once, and he spent the day cleaning and cooking and trying his best to make the place feel like ours instead of his and hers. I showed up with a bottle of cheap sparkling juice and a head full of hope. There were candles, music, a table set for 2. It was the kind of effort people tell you men never make anymore. His parents sent a message saying they were on their way to pick her up. She came down the hallway dressed up, makeup done, hair perfect, acting like she was the main event, and for a minute I thought maybe she was going to be happy for him. She hugged him. She even nodded at me in what might have been her version of politeness. And then right before she reached the door, she stopped. She turned back and said she felt sick. Her stomach hurt. Her head hurt. She did not think she could go out after all. She looked at him with these huge eyes, like a child asking not to be left behind. His parents arrived, confused, tried to convince her, but she clutched her stomach and said she felt like she might pass out. They left without her. The door closed. The candles on the table suddenly felt ridiculous. She flopped on the couch, grabbed the blanket, and turned on some loud show. I looked at him. He looked at me. He said he was sorry, that he would talk to her tomorrow. I said it was fine. I understood. But my chest felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. We ended up eating in the bedroom with the door closed while the television roared from the living room. I told myself this was just one bad night. I told myself that when people are fragile, they sometimes panic at the last minute. I did not want to be the girlfriend who demanded he ignore his sister's supposed distress just so we could have a nice dinner. So I swallowed my disappointment and my resentment along with overcooked pasta and tried to pretend the music coming from his small speaker was enough to drown out the sound of my own frustration. It did not stop there. The second sabotage hit harder because it cost me something that was mine, not just an evening. I had a big presentation at work coming up, one of those things that decides whether people keep seeing you as the girl who fetches coffee and prints things or start seeing you as someone they might actually promote someday. I had talked to him about it for weeks. He knew the date. He knew how nervous I was. He promised he would drive me that morning so I could go over my notes in the passenger seat instead of white-knuckling it through traffic. I woke up early, dressed carefully, checked my slides for the 1,000,000th time, and waited in the kitchen with my bag by the door. He was supposed to be ready 15 minutes before we needed to leave. 10 minutes past that time, his phone rang. His sister. Her contact photo flashed on the screen like an alarm. He answered and his whole face changed. His voice dropped, urgent and soothing. He kept saying things like, "It is okay. Breathe. I am coming. Just hold on." When he hung up, he told me she was at the emergency room. She had called him from the parking lot saying she was having a breakdown, that she did not trust herself, that she needed him there right away. I reminded him, gently at first, then not so gently, that I had that presentation, that I could not be late. He looked torn for about 3 seconds, then said he could drop me off first. But his hands were already grabbing his keys like his body had decided before his brain caught up. The hospital was in the opposite direction from my job. I could see the math on his face. He told me he was sorry, that he had to go, that I would figure something out. He said rideshare, bus, anything. I watched him leave, watched his car turn the corner, and then I stood there in the kitchen feeling like an idiot in a blazer. I ended up waiting for a rideshare that took forever because of morning rush hour, and by the time I got to work, the presentation had already started without me. Someone else stepped in. My boss gave me that disappointed look that says, without words, that maybe I am not as reliable as she thought. Later that day, he came home with his sister, and she looked totally fine. No swollen eyes, no hospital bracelet, no evidence of having actually seen anyone medical. She said she had just needed to be evaluated, but they released her because the waiting room was too crowded. She said the words in this airy voice, as if she had done nothing wrong. When I asked which doctor she had seen, she could not give me a name. My stomach dropped. I tried to explain to him what it had cost me to miss that presentation. I tried to tell him that being there for her did not have to mean dropping everything every single time she snapped her fingers. He went defensive instantly. He said she would never lie about something like that, not after what she had been through. He said I was being cruel. Cruel. That word stung more than I expected. We had our first screaming fight that night. I did not handle it well. I said things like, maybe you are not ready to have a partner. Maybe you are still married to your sister's trauma. He said I was selfish, that I only cared about my career, that family comes first. I shouted back that I had a family too, that my future mattered, that I was not going to be the third wheel in my own relationship. He slept on the couch that night, which was ridiculous because his sister was already there. She disappeared to her room when we started yelling, but I knew she heard every word. The next day, there were new whispers. His parents called, voices tight, asking what happened, saying they heard I had accused their daughter of faking her mental health crisis. Apparently, his sister had already told them her version before the argument had even cooled. Suddenly, I was the insensitive girlfriend who did not understand mental illness, who cared more about a work presentation than a possible relapse. I felt my reality slipping. I knew what I had seen. I knew how she had sounded on the phone, how she had walked into the house later, totally composed, not like someone who had just had a severe episode. But I could not prove any of that without sounding like a monster. I started to feel like I was losing not just the house, but my grip on my own instincts. There were more little things after that. My stuff would be moved just slightly, in ways that made me feel like I was losing my mind. I would put my favorite mug on the counter and find it hours later back in the cabinet behind other cups. My phone charger would vanish from my side of the bed and reappear coiled neatly in the living room. Laundry I had sorted would be mixed back into the dirty pile if I stepped away for a moment. I started keeping notes. It sounds paranoid, and honestly, it probably was, but I needed something on paper to remind myself that I was not inventing this. I wrote down dates, times, what had moved, what had been said. I documented the night she interrupted a conversation about engagement by walking into the room like she had heard a siren. That was the next big blow-up. He and I were lying on the bed, talking quietly about the future, about maybe getting married, about what kind of ceremony we would want. He mentioned saving more aggressively, talked about cutting back on some expenses, what it would take to make it all work. We did not see her shadow in the hallway. We did not hear the creak of the floor. She was just suddenly there in the doorway, eyes wide, like she had walked in on something obscene instead of two adults talking about their lives. She went straight to rage. There was no build-up. 1 minute she was a silent ghost. The next she was shouting that he could not do this to her, that he was abandoning her just like her ex had, that he knew she was not ready to live alone. She accused me of using him for money, of having planned this from the moment I saw the house. She yelled that everything nice in that place had come from his sweat, and she would not let some stranger waltz in and take it. I snapped. I know I did. I said, in a very calm voice that did not match the fire in my chest, that she had lived there for 5 years without paying a single bill, and if anyone was taking advantage, it was not me. She went silent for half a beat, like the words had physically slapped her, and then she started crying, loud, ugly crying, the kind that makes anyone witnessing it feel like the villain. She ran to her room. He ran after her. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall and wondered how I had become the bad guy in a story where I was just trying to build a life with someone. Later, he came back looking exhausted, said she was calm now, that she just needed time to adjust. He asked me not to bring up the bills again because it was a sensitive topic. Sensitive. Living rent-free for half a decade while your brother wears his body out at a warehouse is sensitive. I tried after that to pull back emotionally. I kept my guard up. I stopped sharing as much of myself as before. But feelings are not faucets you can just shut off. He proposed quietly a few months later during a simple dinner out. Nothing fancy, no big spectacle. Just him across the table, hands shaking a little as he held out a small ring and asked if I still wanted to do this with him despite everything. I said yes because of course I did. For all his blind spots, for all his cowardice when it came to confronting his sister. He loved me. I felt that. I believed that. I thought maybe, with the engagement official, he would finally draw some lines. I underestimated how deep his guilt went, how much power his sister had over that guilt. When we came home that night, engagement still new and shiny on my finger, she was waiting. She had clearly been sitting by the window because she opened the door before we even reached it. She saw the ring before we said anything. For a second, her face went blank. Then she smiled. It was the most unsettling smile I had ever seen. She congratulated us. She hugged him, told him she was happy for him, that he deserved happiness. She even hugged me briefly, her hands cold on my back. She said she would stay out of our way and let us plan. She went back to her room and closed the door gently, and I felt this chill run through me that the heater could not touch. For a while after that, she played nice. She asked about venues, about dates, about color schemes. She offered to help with decorations. It almost got me. I almost let myself believe she had turned a corner. Then the little sabotages returned, dressed up in new clothes. She would schedule loud repairs on the house exactly when we had virtual tours with potential venues. She would borrow the car without asking on days we needed to run errands for the wedding, and then claim she had forgotten the schedule. I kept writing everything down. I started taking photos, receipts left on the counter that did not match the story she told, bank mail she left open in the trash that mentioned limits being raised because of high balances, a neighbor's offhand comment about seeing her drive a brand new looking sedan out of a shiny parking lot near downtown. The puzzle took shape slowly. She was not broke. She was not helpless. She had a full-time job at a company across town, not the occasional shift she had portrayed. That job paid well, according to every salary range search I did on my phone late at night in bed. She had her own money. She had had it for a while. I showed him everything. I waited until he was calm, until his sister was out of the house, until we had enough time to sit down. I spread out the photos, the notes, the printouts. I told him what I had noticed, what I had learned, what the neighbor had said. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched his hands shake. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had debts I did not know about. Maybe the car was leased through work. Maybe the bank mail was a mistake. But the more he looked, the more the cracks showed. There were patterns he could not ignore. There were numbers that did not add up to helplessness. He got quiet in a way I had never seen before. Not the shut-down quiet of someone avoiding a fight, but the brittle quiet of someone realizing their entire reality might have been built on a story someone else told them. He said he needed to talk to her. I said I thought he did too. The confrontation that followed felt like watching a play from the back of the theater. I could hear everything through the thin walls. He asked calm questions at first. She dodged. He pressed. She cried. She screamed. She accused me of turning him against her. She said he was the only person who had ever been there for her, and now he was abandoning her just like her ex. He did not back down this time. I do not know if it was the evidence in front of him or just finally reaching some limit, but he told her that things had to change. He gave her a deadline, 60 days to find a place of her own, 60 days of him still helping with the bills, with the move, with whatever she needed to get started, but after that, she had to go. She reacted like he had sentenced her to exile. She called their parents, sobbing into the phone loud enough for anyone on the street to hear. She told them he was heartless now, that his girlfriend had poisoned him, that no one cared if she lived or died. They came over that weekend ready to calm things down, and for once the universe did me a small favor. They saw the bank mail. They saw the car. They heard the neighbor's comment. They listened to him when he laid out everything. There was this moment in the living room where all four of them were standing there, and I was in the doorway, half in and half out, feeling like an intruder in a family war. His mother looked at his sister and asked, point blank, how she paid for that car if she had no money. His sister stumbled over her words. His father frowned. The narrative she had built over 5 years started to crumble right there on the beige carpet. The best friend showed up then, like some kind of chaotic neutral messenger. He had dropped by to say hi and got pulled into the mess in one breath. He sat down, listened, and then said what no one else wanted to say out loud. He told them he had seen this before. He told them their daughter had ruined 2 serious relationships in the past, using the same tricks. He told them she had learned that if she whispered about feeling unstable, everyone would drop everything and fall in line. It was brutal. It was also the truth. The deadline stood. 60 days. She hated me openly after that. No more polite masks, no more fragile act when I was around. She slammed doors, banged cabinets, made sure I knew exactly how much she blamed me for everything. I started keeping my packed suitcase under the bed just in case. 1 week before the deadline, she suddenly became sick. Mysterious stomach pain, late-night trips to the emergency room, vague posts on that social media app about being forced out while she was unwell. She sent him messages saying that if anything happened to her, it would be on his conscience. She called relatives they had not spoken to in years and told them a twisted version of the story. The deadline came and went. She was still in her room, still using the bathroom for long showers at inconvenient hours, still leaving passive-aggressive notes about dishes in the sink. He hesitated. I could see it. The guilt had its hands around his throat again. I broke before he did. I packed a bag one afternoon while he was at work. I wrote a short note and left it on his pillow. I walked next door and knocked on the neighbor's door, voice shaking as I asked if I could stay with her for a while. She did not even blink. She made up the guest bed and handed me a mug of tea and told me I did not have to explain anything until I was ready. He showed up 2 days later looking like he had not slept. He sat at the neighbor's kitchen table and told me he had finally started the legal process. There were forms. There would be a hearing. It would take time, but it was happening. He said he could not bear the thought of me building a life anywhere else, while his sister slowly strangled his future in that house. The weeks that followed were slow and vicious. His sister did everything she could to make the environment unbearable before she left. Clothes ruined by bleach mysteriously appearing in the laundry. Scratches suddenly gouged into the wooden floor in the bedroom. A sentimental dish that used to belong to their grandmother smashed on the counter with a note that said, "Accidents happen." He documented it all. Photos, dates, everything, because the lawyer had told him to. The sister, who had spent years playing the helpless one, now showed her teeth. She locked herself in her room and claimed tenant rights. He could not just change the locks because she had been there so long. The system that was supposed to protect vulnerable people now had to be used against someone who had been faking vulnerability for gain. His parents, finally fully awake, backed him. They offered to help her with deposits for a small apartment. They told her this was the healthy thing, that she needed to stand on her own 2 feet. She spat their kindness back in their faces and posted more bitter messages online about being betrayed by everyone she loved. The day the moving truck finally pulled up, months after that first deadline, the air in the house felt different, heavy, charged. She supervised the movers in icy silence, barely looking at anyone. She took everything she could, including some items that technically were his, but he let it go. He just wanted her out. When the truck pulled away and the house went quiet, he stood in the living room and cried. Not the silent tears of someone who regrets a decision, but the full-bodied sobs of someone who has just realized how much of his life had been spent carrying someone who never intended to walk on their own. I stood there with him, not really sure what to say. My own relief tangled with a strange grief for a relationship that had been damaged beyond repair. We painted the walls a few weeks later. New colors, new furniture arrangements, small changes that felt bigger than they looked. We took down most of the photos and replaced them slowly with new ones. Not just of us, but of friends, of his parents, of dinners and holidays that did not end in shouting matches. The house started to feel lighter, like it was finally allowed to be what it had wanted to be all along. A home, not a holding cell. His mother reached out to me separately one day and asked if we could meet for coffee. She apologized for not seeing things sooner, for believing her daughter's performance over the quiet reality I had been living. She admitted she had been afraid that confronting one child meant losing her entirely, and in trying to save her, they had almost cost their son his future. I told her I understood more than she thought. I told her I knew what it was like to tiptoe around someone who made their pain everyone else's excuse. I also told her that understanding did not erase the damage. We both agreed on that. Some things you acknowledge, you work through, you move on from, but they still leave marks. We eventually went through with the wedding. Smaller than originally planned, more intimate, fewer people, more boundaries. We invited his sister because I did not want to be the reason their relationship stayed permanently broken if there was any chance, however small, of something softening later. She sent a short message saying she would try to make it. On the day of, she did not show up. Instead, she sent him a long, rambling text about how watching him move on without her was too painful, about how she would always feel like he had traded her in. He read it once, put the phone in his pocket, and walked back to the dance floor. We did not talk about it again that night. Sometimes when the house is quiet and the only sound is the hum of the fridge and the distant noise of a late-night car passing by, I think about how close I came to walking away for good. I think about the versions of me that live in other timelines. The ones who did not stay. The ones who did stay but never spoke up. The ones who turned into shadows in hallways tiptoeing around someone else's volcano. In this one, I stayed. But I also drew a line. I left when I had to. I made him choose. Not between me and his sister, but between living in the past and building an actual future. It still feels messy. It still hurts sometimes. Family wounds do not close just because people move out. But when I wake up in that house now, I do not feel like a guest in someone else's drama. I feel like it is mine too. Not just because there is a ring on my finger or my name on some piece of paper now, but because I fought for it. Because I stopped letting other people's trauma take up every inch of space. Because I finally believed that my sanity, my career, my little dreams of having a house that smelled like my own cooking were worth protecting. People like to say that houses remember what happens inside them. If that is true, then this house remembers the nights of slammed doors and whispered threats and silent tears. It remembers the way guilt echoed louder than any argument. But I like to think it also remembers the first time I sat on the couch after she left. Legs tucked under me, hair a mess, eating leftovers straight from the container, laughing with him over some stupid show, and feeling for the first time like the walls were not closing in, but opening up. Maybe one day she will get help for real. Maybe she will figure out how to live without needing someone else to hold her up as a permanent job. Maybe she will hate me forever. That part is not really my story anymore. What I know is that I walked into a house that was already haunted by a living person, and somehow, with a lot of screaming, a lot of crying, and a judge's signature, we managed to let that ghost go. It is not a perfect ending. There is no big group hug, no magically healed family. There is just us, in a small house on a quiet street, paying the bills, arguing over stupid things like who left a wet towel on the bed, making up, learning how to be partners without third parties hijacking every decision. There is just real life, which is messy and petty and painful and, on good days, pretty good. And honestly, I will take that over a drama-filled living room with a permanent third person on the couch any day. If you are wondering whether everything magically stayed peaceful after all of that, it really did not. Real life is not a movie, and there is no closing credits scene where everyone suddenly learns all the right words to say forever. We still had plenty of nights where something small turned into something loud, and then into that awful quiet that feels heavier than yelling. There were mornings where I went to work with swollen eyes and too much concealer because the argument had dragged past midnight, and neither of us wanted to be the first to back down, even when we had no idea what we were really fighting about anymore. Those arguments were not always about his sister, at least not directly. Sometimes they were about dishes, or who forgot to take the trash out, or why he seemed distracted when I was talking, or why I shut down instead of saying what I needed. But underneath almost every fight, there was this shared bruise from everything that had happened in that house before. I would say something sharp, and then immediately hear my own voice and hate that it sounded a little bit like his sister on her worst days. He would get defensive and then visibly flinch, like he was bracing for another guilt trip, even when I was just asking a normal question. We ended up sitting in a tiny counseling office one evening a week for a while, talking to a tired-looking woman with kind eyes who had clearly heard every possible version of codependent family drama at least 100 times. She did not do any magic. She just asked annoying questions like why I stayed so long without saying what I really needed, and why he thought it was his job to be the emotional paramedic for every person in his family. She made us actually listen when the other person spoke, instead of rehearing what we already believed. One thing she said stuck with me more than anything. She said that when you spend years in survival mode, you start to think the constant adrenaline and chaos is normal, and a calm life feels wrong, like the quiet before a storm. She said, of course, the house felt weird after his sister left. We were both waiting for the next explosion. We had to teach our bodies that peace was not the same thing as danger. Little things helped, making small routines that were ours, that had nothing to do with anyone else. walking around the block after dinner when the weather was decent, phones left on the counter, cooking together on weekends even when we messed up the recipe and ended up eating cereal instead, laughing at how bad we were at fixing a crooked shelf and then calling someone who actually knew what they were doing instead of pretending we had everything under control. His parents came over more often too, but in a different way. Less frantic, less about putting out fires, more about just sharing a meal and going home. His mother would sometimes pause in the hallway and put her hand on the wall like she was remembering the old days, then shake her head and move on. Once, when we were cleaning up after they left, she told me in a low voice that she used to dread visiting because she never knew what version of her daughter she would get, and now she could finally look forward to it again. I will not pretend I am some saint in all of this. I still catch myself keeping score, mentally tallying who compromised more that week or who apologized first last time. I still have moments where I feel this irrational spike of jealousy when he gets a message from an unknown number, even though it is usually just a coworker asking to swap shifts. That kind of hypervigilance does not vanish just because the original threat packed her things and moved into a one-bedroom apartment across town. Every once in a while, someone will mention his sister. A relative will ask if he has talked to her, if she is doing better, if she ever apologized. He usually answers with something vague, like they have checked in a few times and she seems stable, and then he changes the subject. I keep my face neutral. I do not join the conversation. Her name still feels like a trigger pulled in slow motion. There was one message she sent months after the wedding that I never told anyone about. It popped up late one night, long after he had fallen asleep on the couch with the television still murmuring. It was long, rambling, and not really an apology. She said she hoped I was happy. She said she knew I would always see her as the villain of my little story. She said that one day I might understand how terrifying it is to watch someone move on without you when you built your entire identity around being their reason for staying. For a second reading it, I felt this weird ache in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but that uncomfortable awareness that even the people who hurt us most are still human in their own way. Then I thought about the ruined clothes, the smashed heirloom dish, the way she looked at me like I was an intruder in a life she believed she owned, and the ache turned into something else. Not anger, not anymore, just a very firm no. I deleted the message, not out of pettiness, but because I did not want it living in my phone, waiting to ambush me on a bad day. If she ever really wants to make things right, it will not be through a half-honest paragraph sent at midnight. It will have to be in person, with real accountability, and honestly, I am not holding my breath. So no, this is not some inspirational story with a neat moral and soft music fading out while everyone hugs. It is just me, sitting at my kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of coffee, telling you how a woman who was basically a permanent guest in her brother's house almost became the main character in my relationship. It is me admitting that I stayed longer than a lot of people think they would have, that I ignored red flags because I loved him, that I lost parts of myself in the process and had to claw them back piece by piece. If there is anything close to a point here, it is this. A house is not a home just because someone worked themselves half to death to pay for it. It becomes a home when the people inside stop treating guilt like a mortgage and start treating respect like a non-negotiable bill. We are still late on that payment sometimes. We still mess up. But at least now, when the wind howls outside and the weather turns strange, I do not immediately brace for a new internal storm. I just check the forecast, close the windows, and remind myself that this time, if something feels off, I am allowed to say so out loud before the whole place floods again. What I do not always tell people when I tell this story out loud is how weird the quiet felt in the months right after she left. Everyone loves the big moments, right? The deadline, the moving truck, the tears in the living room. That is the part that sounds like something out of a drama. But the part that really stuck with me was the Tuesday nights when nothing huge was happening and my brain could not figure out if that was finally a good thing or if it meant we had missed some disaster we were supposed to see coming. There were so many little firsts that no one claps for. First time I walked into the kitchen in the middle of the night to get water and did not instinctively tense up, listening for someone shifting on the couch. First time I did laundry without checking 3 times if I had left anything in the machine that someone might ruin on purpose. First time I hung a small picture on the wall in the hallway, and did not immediately imagine someone taking it down just to remind me whose house it was. Around that time, my job situation also shifted. Remember that presentation I missed because of the emergency room performance? That came back around in a way I was not expecting. My manager called me into her office a couple of months later, and I had that familiar dread in my stomach, the one that makes you plan your unemployment budget before you even sit down. She closed the door, which is never a great sign, And then she asked, very calmly, what had happened that day. I had given her the short version before. Family emergency? Could not get there in time. I was sorry. This time she wanted the long version. I do not know what came over me, but I decided to just tell her the truth. Not all the messy details, obviously, but enough. I told her I had been living in a house where someone else's crisis controlled everything. I told her I had promised myself I would never let that happen again. I told her that if she gave me another shot, I would treat it like a line in the sand. She listened without interrupting, which honestly almost made me cry more than if she had yelled. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said, "You are not the only person here who is untangling themselves from somebody else's chaos. You know that, right?" Then she told me about a coworker who used to sleep in her car in the parking lot to avoid going home because of a volatile roommate. She said, "Life happens, but patterns are choices," and she wanted to see if I was actually changing mine. She put me on a smaller project first, nothing flashy, just a chance to show I could show up consistently again. I treated that thing like it was a promotion to running the whole building. I prepped more than I needed to. I asked questions. I stayed late when it made sense and went home on time when it did not. Because burning myself out to prove I was worthy felt uncomfortably close to what my boyfriend had been doing for his sister for years. Slowly, she started trusting me again. I got more responsibility. There was a day, about a year after the whole emergency room disaster, where she stopped by my desk and said she was glad I had stuck it out instead of quitting or letting things fall apart. It was such a small thing, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been sitting in that waiting room with him while he held his sister's hand instead of my future. At home, we were still figuring out what normal even meant. The therapist had us doing these annoying exercises where we had to say things like, "When you do X, I feel Y," instead of just snapping at each other. It felt fake and awkward at first, like reading lines from a script. But after a while, something about slowing down enough to actually name the feeling instead of just hurling it across the room stopped us from turning every disagreement into a relaunch of the same old war. There was one fight in particular that could have gone very differently before. He came home late one night after a long shift at the warehouse, and I had asked him earlier that week to call or send a quick message if he thought he was going to be later than usual. Nothing dramatic, just basic courtesy so I would not sit there refreshing my messages and imagining car accidents. He forgot. Of course he did. Old habits die loud. He walked in, exhausted, and found me sitting at the table with my laptop open and my dinner cold. Old me would have gone straight for the throat. "You never listen. You never do what you say you will. I cannot rely on you." This time, I took a breath that felt like it lasted an hour and said, "When you do not call, I feel like I do not matter. I know you are tired and you are not doing it to hurt me, but my brain goes to all the worst places." He stared at me for a second like I had spoken a different language. Then he dropped his bag, sat down, and said he was sorry. Not defensively, not in that "sorry you feel that way" kind of way, but in the way that lets you see the regret. He admitted he had spent so many years running around putting out his sister's fires that his default setting was still react to whatever screams the loudest. And quiet needs did not even register unless someone underlined them twice. We are still working on that. I am still learning to underline my needs before they turn into silence or sarcastic comments. He is still learning that not every request is an accusation. It is work, and not the cute kind. Another thing no one really prepares you for is how weird family holidays get after a big rupture. That first major holiday after she moved out, his mother invited us and, out of habit, invited her too. Nobody knew if she would actually show. The room felt like it was saving a seat for a ghost. People talked about everything and nothing in that strained way where everyone is trying to keep the conversation in safe territory. She did walk in eventually, right when everyone had started to relax a little. She looked different, which threw me more than I expected. New haircut, new clothes that actually fit, makeup done in a way that said she had spent time in front of a mirror caring about the result. For a second, if you did not know the history, you would have thought she was just any relative dropping by with a casserole. She said hello to everyone, even to me. The hello she gave me was thin and brittle, but it existed. She gave his mother a plant in a plain pot and joked about finally contributing something that did not come with drama. People laughed in that confused way where no one is sure if they are allowed to. We stayed on opposite sides of the room for most of the night. There was one small moment in the kitchen, though, when we ended up alone for a minute while I was refilling a bowl of something. She reached for a glass in the cabinet above my head and said, without looking at me, that she had heard through their mother that we were doing well. I said, also without looking directly at her, that I had heard she was holding down her job and paying her own rent now. It was the most civil exchange we had ever had. No apologies, no rehashing, no big breakthrough. Just two women acknowledging that the other one existed outside of the worst thing that had happened between us. It was almost harder than yelling would have been. On the drive home, he asked me what I thought. I told him the truth, that I was glad she seemed stable, that I did not hate her, that I also did not trust her even a little bit, and that I was not interested in pretending we were all one big healed family. He nodded, eyes on the road, and said he did not know if he would ever fully trust his own instincts around her again either, which might be the saddest part of all of this. My own family reacted to everything in their own special way. My mother, queen of unsolicited commentary, told me I was brave for staying in such a messy situation, which is a word people use when they do not want to say what they are actually thinking. My father, who usually stays out of drama unless it involves sports, surprised me by saying he was glad I did not just run at the first sign of trouble, but also glad I finally walked when it got too far. It was the closest thing to balance I had heard from anyone about it. One night, months after the court hearing and the move and the wedding and all of it, I was sitting on the couch scrolling through that same social media app where she had posted her vague victim messages. I saw a picture of a sunset she had put up, captioned with something about new beginnings and learning to stand alone. The comments were full of people telling her how strong she was, how inspiring, how proud they were of her. Past me would have thrown my phone across the room. This time I just put it down and leaned my head back. I realized I did not need the internet to know who the real victim was anymore. I did not need strangers to validate that I had not been crazy, that the manipulation had been real. I had the empty living room as proof. I had full control of the thermostat and the laundry schedule and the music volume as proof. I had the way my shoulders sat a little lower now when I walked through my own hallway. Sometimes I still catch traces of her. Not physically, but in the way my thoughts twist. If he is on his phone and does not answer me right away, a small voice will still whisper that someone else must be pulling his attention, that I am about to be sidelined again. If a friend cancels plans at the last minute and calls it a mental health day, another small voice will ask if I'm being played. Living through a long con of emotional manipulation does that to you. It sharpens your suspicion in ways that are not always helpful. But I am trying not to let that define me. I do not want to turn into someone who sees every tear as a tactic. I do not want to be the person who hears the word anxiety and immediately files it under excuse. So I check myself. I talk about it in therapy. I remind myself that most people are not her, and even she was not a cartoon villain, just a very broken person who learned all the wrong lessons about how to get her needs met. The most surprising change, if I really sit with it, is what this whole mess taught me about what I will and will not live with again. Before that house, I used to bend over backwards for anyone who had a big enough sad story. Family, friends, co-workers, whoever. If you cried hard enough or looked lost enough, I would rearrange my life to make yours easier. I called it empathy. A lot of it was fear of being seen as selfish. Now, when someone tries to hand me their chaos and call it love, I pause. I ask myself if I am being supportive or just volunteering to be the new emotional first responder in a situation I did not start. I say no more often. It still feels strange in my mouth sometimes, but it also feels like oxygen. Every once in a while, on a rainy night, I will think back to that first fundraiser where I met him, to the wind rattling the doors, and the way his laugh cut through the nervous noise of strangers stuck together in bad weather. If someone had tapped me on the shoulder that night and told me, "Hey, just so you know, if you keep talking to this guy, you are signing up for years of secondhand guilt and a lie-in saboteur," I probably would have backed away slowly and sprinted to my car. But I also would have missed out on everything that came after the storm. The hard conversations, the therapy, the tiny, boring, beautiful routines of actual partnership, the way it feels now to sit on that same couch where his sister used to spread herself out like a warning sign and know that I can put my feet up without bracing for impact. So no, our story is not simple, and it is definitely not pretty. It is scratched up and patched together, full of bad decisions and late realizations and one very long eviction process. It is also mine. That might be the biggest difference. For a long time, I was just a guest star in a show that had started before I was ever cast. Now, for better or worse, I am one of the writers. And if another storm rolls in one day, if some new crisis bangs on the door demanding that we throw out our boundaries and set ourselves on fire to keep someone else warm, I know at least this much. I will not go back to living in a house where my name is only on the mail but never on the decisions. I will grab my own coat, check the locks, and make sure we are the ones deciding who gets to come in and how long they stay. The weather can do what it wants outside. Inside, this is finally our home, not a permanent shelter for someone else's unfinished healing. One of the last little full-circle moments came on an ordinary weekday, when the neighbor knocked on our door instead of the other way around. She needed help carrying in a bulky box, and as we wrestled it up her steps together, she laughed and said she still remembered the day I showed up on her porch with a suitcase and eyes that would not stop darting back at my own front door. She said, "You realize you do not look over your shoulder like that anymore, right?" I did not until she said it. I walked back to my house after that, key warm in my hand, and for the first time, it hit me that the danger I was always scanning for was not in the building anymore. It was just old muscle memory catching up to a safer life.